What if we have a photo or a shape and we want text in a story to wrap around it? That's easy to do in InDesign. We'll just add a text wrap. So go to File, Place, and in Lookbook, go to Photos, and then select one of these photos, click Open, and I'm just going to click and drag, so we just place it somewhere over here. We can adjust it later. I'm going to set this so it's the width of 2 columns here. Control Shift, click and drag the side, or we could use the transform tool. So it's right here, but it's covering up the text. It's arranged on the top because it's the most recent object we've placed, and it's covering up the text. That's not what we want. In order to add a text wrap, we want to make sure whatever photo or illustration or shape we want text to wrap around is selected. So this photo is selected, so let's go to Window and then Text Wrap. And the first option is the default, which means no text wrap. So if we ever have a text wrap, we want to remove it, we can just click that. The second one is wrap around the bounding box. And we can see now this text wraps around the bounding box. So if I click and drag the edge of the bounding box, it will adjust accordingly. So it's not wrapping just around this photo, it's wrapping around the bounding box that it's in. So I could add a little bit of space on the edge, put this in the middle, Control click and drag to make it a little bit smaller here, and then it wraps around it nicely. But we don't have to add the spacing like that. We can actually have the frame right along the edge of the photo, like the default, like when we first place it, and we can just increase the spacing around it using these options here. These are all set to be the same with this click. So if I click this up, we'll see it adds the spacing around it. So as far as proximity and effective spacing, we want a little bit of space between this photo and the text. We don't want flush right next to it. Now what we don't want to do is have something like this happen, where we have one word or less on just one line. That's not readable. So what we could do is just click and drag this over so it's right flush with the edge like that. We could bring this down and so on. If we want just one side to have a different padding there, we can uncheck this chain link and then adjust it accordingly. For example, I could bring this one over or adjust it like so. Now this third option here, wrap text around object shape, what that means is instead of the bounding box, and if it's right along the side of the element such as the photo anyway, it's going to have the same effect. It actually wraps around the object itself. So I'll show you what I mean. If I click and drag this photo inside the bounding box over here, you'll notice even though the bounding box is right here, this blue line, we have the text wraps around the photo. So if I move that around and bring that bounding box out, it doesn't matter. It will only wrap around this photo. Now we could set this down here where we have contour options. We could set it to graphic frame, and then it would actually wrap around the frame that we have there. If we set to detect edges, that's if we had a photo where there was an obvious edge and it would try to detect it. And there are a couple other options in there like alpha channel. I'm going to place another image here from other projects just to show what that does. So I'll go to File, Place, and then in the poster support files in our photos, let's place this coffee.psd and let's just select Show Import Options. And let's just uncheck this background layer so we only have background copy. Click OK. I'm going to click and drag. And so if I add a text wrap to this one with this third option, by default, it's both right and left sides, and same as clipping. And so if I go to, for example, detect edges, see how it detects the edge of this? Because we have a partially transparent PSD file, and this is transparent. It's wrapping perfectly around that shape there, so if I increase that, it'll give it a little bit of breathing room. So besides detect edges, we can also go to alpha channel, and for this purpose, it's pretty much the same effect. It's because it's transparent. So there are a couple options there, such as detect edges or alpha channel when we place in a PSD file or a partially transparent image, and we want text to wrap around not the bounding box or a square or rectangular shaped photo, but a uniquely shaped photo that has a transparent background like that. We can also wrap text around shapes. So if I, for example, draw out a circle, I'll just hold Shift for a perfect circle here, and I'll just set the fill to some kind of swatch here, just set it to that. And if I click and drag it over here, and then I add a text wrap to this one right here, wrap around bounding box. If I click and drag, you'll notice it wraps around that box. But if I click this third one, wrap around image, just like it wraps around the photo itself, this wraps around just the shape. So that's another way to wrap text around elements. We can also go to File, Place, and of course select a photo. Let's say this one here, and then click Open. And I'm just going to click right on top of this shape here. And if I click and drag this over here, it still wraps around it, even though we have a photo in there as well. I'm going to increase the space in there just a little bit. So I'm going to press W, see how this is looking so far, to show these techniques in the context of creating an actual project. So thanks, and I'll see you in the next lesson.